What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. 75 years ago today, All About Eve held its world premiere in New York City and rapidly became one of the most beloved movies of that era, or basically of any era. And I have my beautiful 4K restoration right here, courtesy of the fine folks at Criterion. And I have to say, the movie looks spectacular. And there's all kinds of good stuff in this package, including the original short story, The Wisdom of Eve, by Mary Orr, actually, with a couple of essays in here, as well as the short story. In any case, this is one of those movies that was not only a massive hit, but it also won tons of awards for the second year in a row. Writer-director Joseph L. Mankiewicz won the Oscars for Best Screenplay and Best Director. I'm not sure if that's ever been done by any other filmmaker, but he won one year for A Letter to Three Wives, which is incredible. And then he did it again with All About Eve, but to the present day, All About Eve remains insanely popular amongst film buffs of all ages. Today, we're going to talk all about it.
Miss Davis, ever since I've been on this set, I've heard nothing but discussion of Eve. May I have your opinion of her?
The golden girl, the cover girl, the girl next door, the girl on the moon. Time's been very good to Eve. Life goes where she goes. She's been profiled, covered, revealed, reported, what she wears and where and when, whom she knows, and where she was, and when and where she's going. Eve has insatiable ambition and talent, an improbable person with a contempt for humanity, an inability to love or be loved.
So earlier this year, I recorded 75th anniversary reviews for both In a Lonely Place as well as Sunset Boulevard. And as I said before, I look at all three of these movies together as a kind of unholy trilogy about the dark side of showbiz, whether you're talking about the art of screenwriting or the silent era of movies and the transition to sound, or the world of Broadway here in New York. And each of these movies is equally cynical and hard-hitting in their own way. But when it comes to All About Eve, the movie's so dazzling and so witty, watching it's a little bit like swigging like an ice-cold glass of champagne. And because the movie's so enjoyable, it's easy to overlook just how ruthless and how savage the movie can be. But the appeal of the movie, it's not all that mysterious. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, he was probably the best screenplay of his career, and then he assembled the best cast that he could find to bring it to life. But if you're one of the unfortunate few out there who has not yet had the privilege of seeing this movie...
To those of you who do not read, attend the theater, listen to unsponsored radio programs, or know anything of the world in which you live,
let me offer a quick spoiler-free pitch, and then after that, I'm going to assume that you're ready for the deep dive into everything I love about this movie. The premise, according to IMDb, is relatively simple. A seemingly timid but secretly ruthless ingenue insinuates herself into the lives of an aging Broadway star and her circle of theater friends. But I should also add that the ingenue is Eve Harrington, played by Anne Baxter, while the star in question is Margot Channing, played by the legendary Bette Davis. And within the context of the movie, Margot's circle of friends happens to include the most successful writer and director duo working on Broadway at that time. And once Eve's worked her way into their inner circle, she proceeds with a level of determination that's worthy of Napoleon as she slowly but surely achieves her dream of becoming a star on Broadway. No matter how many dead bodies or at a minimum betrayed friends she has to leave in her wake.
You do all that just for a part in a play.
I'd do much more for a part that good.
And the only person within this incredible cast of characters who can rival Eve in her insatiable ambition for glory is a merciless theater critic by the name of Addison DeWitt, who just might be my favorite character in the history of movies.
My name is Addison DeWitt. My native habitat is the theater. In it I toil not, neither do I spin. I am a critic and commentator. I am essential to the theater.
And I admit that's a bold statement, and obviously there are tons of strong contenders for that honor. But if you were to back me into a corner at a party and say, what is the greatest performance or your favorite performance in the history of movies, George Sanders as Addison DeWitt. He's a strong contender. And I have no idea how long I'm going to continue to make videos about movies on this channel. But if by the end of the journey I can make just one observation worthy of Addison DeWitt, then I'll consider my time on this earth well spent. Because this is one of those rare moments in movie history where great material and a great actor collide in a way where every line of dialogue just feels like it's purred with pleasure. And George Sanders, he does so with so much brilliance and so much malice and so much contempt for humanity that even as I try to sing his praises, the best I can hope for is that I come across like a braying mule in comparison to his unforgettable delivery style. But I think this is the last point I want to make to the unconverted. This is a movie for people where the art of great storytelling, whether you're talking about books or movies or theater or whatever, is more important than life itself. The movie's endlessly rewatchable, but now it's time to slow down and talk a little bit about the filmmaker who made this movie happen, Joseph L. Mankiewicz. So let's talk about Joseph L. Mankiewicz, brother to the great Herman J. Mankiewicz, who co-wrote a little movie you might have heard of called Citizen Kane. But of all the great Golden Age directors, I've never included Joseph L. Mankiewicz in the list of like the directors that I totally obsess over the same way I do like with like Howard Hawks or Ernst Lubitsch or Orson Welles or Joseph von Sternberg. I mean, the beautiful thing about the Golden Age of Hollywood is that there are so many incredible directors working at the same time, you can afford to be kind of choosy about which ones you place on a pedestal and which ones you don't. But as I was getting prepared for this video, I decided to address a few of my Joseph L. Mankiewicz blind spots. And I still have a few blind spots remaining, but I saw for the first time The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, which I absolutely loved. A Letter to the Three Wives, which I think is Joseph L. Mankiewicz's second best movie behind All About Eve. I saw Julius Caesar for the first time. Marlon Brando's dreadful in it, but it's worth seeing for John Gielgud, who is incredible as Cassius. I'd already seen The Barefoot Contessa many years ago, but I saw Suddenly last summer for the first time. Elizabeth Taylor was incredible in it, and that's how Joseph L. Mankiewicz got sucked into the disastrous runaway production of Cleopatra, which admittedly was a huge hit at that time. But the budget was big enough for basically 4 or 5 blockbusters. I think Mankiewicz used to describe it as like the toughest 4 movies that he ever shot, but it basically kind of drained all the remaining life and vitality out of his body for a while, and he was having to resort to shots to wake up and shots to go to sleep. But luckily, he did manage to rebound before the end of his career, and he made a movie called Sleuth in 1972, which I also saw before making this video, and that's fantastic as well. But I think one of the main reasons I've never gotten totally sucked into Joseph L. Mankiewicz's career is that as a director, he's much less concerned with visuals than someone like Alfred Hitchcock or Orson Welles or John Ford or any of the great visual stylists from the golden age of Hollywood. He's much more interested in dialogue and performance. But when it comes to dialogue and performance, he doesn't really have any equals. And on this Blu-ray, as well as on YouTube, you can hunt down a documentary called All About Mankiewicz, where he walks you through his entire career, including some of his early kind of failed experiments with trying to seize control or take the reins of the photography on his movies, which leads to that line in All About Eve.
Don't let it worry you, said the cameraman. Even Tamil couldn't see anything looking through the wrong end, so that was the first and last.
Don't let me kill the point, or isn't it a story for grown-ups?
You've heard it. About the time I looked through the wrong end of the camera finder.
Where you hear the character Bill telling Eve the story about his disastrous first day on the set of a movie in Hollywood where he was looking through a viewfinder from the wrong point of view. But that's actually a story from Joseph L. Mankiewicz's life, which he shares in All About Mankiewicz, where he was working with a cameraman who works for John Ford, who basically told him at a certain point, like, I've worked with all these incredible directors, like, let me lend my expertise and all that accumulated knowledge to you, and all you have to do is say, you know what, that's just what I was thinking, and you can take credit for all of it, which I think is very wise advice. If you want to be a great director, you don't have to know how to do everybody's job better than they do. You just have to know how to kind of marshal and harness their skills, and then you can always take credit for it if the movie turns out to be a good one after the fact.
I have to admit it, because it's a standard joke by now. I looked through the round end. This is the wrong end of the finder. You're supposed to look through the rectangular end, and I couldn't see anything, and I turned to Arthur Miller, John Ford's cameraman, and Artie Miller said, look, why don't you just set this scene up as you would? Just set it up with the actors and play it the way you want to play it. And then call me over and say, Artie, what do you think? And I'll come up with some kind of a suggestion. It might be something you never thought of. You know, in which case, all you have to do is say, that's just what I had in mind. And you're in. Don't worry about it.
But I do think sometimes people are unnecessarily harsh when describing the photographic style of Mankiewicz, because he shoots in an economical fashion, but there are some great shots in his movies. Like in All About Eve, one of my favorite shots, probably my favorite shot, is when you have most of the cast just hanging out at a party on the stairwell, smoking cigarettes, swigging cocktails, talking about the theater, and it's fantastic. And it's not calling attention to itself, but it's incredibly functional. It's in service of the drama at hand. And I think pretty much every storytelling instinct by Mankiewicz is always to showcase the performances of his actors as opposed to his visionary visuals. Also, when you're blessed to be as great a writer as Joseph L. Mankiewicz, why not place a heavier emphasis on the writing and the performances? Because if you have great writing like that, you don't need all those incredible visual flourishes. I mean, as I was taking notes for this video, like every single line of dialogue or bit of voiceover narration in the movie was like, oh my God, I got to write that down. Oh, I got to write that down. I was just I was getting overwhelmed trying to keep track of all the incredible lines. And when you watch the documentary all about Mankiewicz at the time, he's bemoaning the growing illiteracy of the American public in the early 1980s. Now it's like a cancer spreading out through society. I almost kind of feel glad that he didn't live to 2025, because if he could see how illiterate people have become in 2025 versus 1981, well then he might not ever stop throwing up. But getting back to All About Eve, if like me, you're one of those people where you'd seen All About Eve many times, but it kind of neglected the rest of Joseph L. Mankiewicz's career, definitely check out The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, because George Sanders is great in that. He's not as good as he is as Addison DeWitt, but George Sanders is still incredible in that, and you basically get to see the beginning of the relationship between George Sanders and Joseph L. Mankiewicz. But A Letter to Three Wives is fucking Hall of Fame, late 40s greatness. It's if All About Eve did not exist, A Letter to Three Wives would be regarded as one of the best movies of the 1940s. It's just been kind of overshadowed by All About Eve, which came out the following year. But it's like those three movies, that's what I would recommend people start with if they want to get into the career of Joseph L. Mankiewicz. But let's talk a little bit about the origins of the story for All About Eve.
And no brighter light has ever dazzled the eye than Eve Harrington. Eve. But more of Eve later. All About Eve, in fact.
The original short story, The Wisdom of Eve, appeared in Cosmopolitan magazine back in 1946 and then was produced as a radio drama. Then after Fox bought the rights to the story, Joseph L. Mankiewicz basically took the short story and combined it with yet another story he had been writing about an actress who's thinking back on her life while receiving an award, which creates the framing device for All About Eve. And there were many actresses considered for the part of Margot Channing, but originally it was going to be Claudette Colbert who was going to play the role, but she suffered a ruptured disc while filming a movie called Three Came Home, and she had to back out of the project, which opened the door to Bette Davis getting the part, in spite of the fact that Daryl Zanuck absolutely despised her. There was no love lost between the two of them, but that's totally fine. This is one of those movies where you didn't necessarily need everybody to like each other while they were working on it. Famously, Bette Davis, hang on, I've got this anecdote written down. So according to this anecdote from IMDb, co-star Celeste Holm, she was talking about her experience working with Bette Davis on the first day of shooting. And she says, I walked onto the set on the first day and said, good morning. And do you know her reply? She said, oh shit, good manners. I never spoke to her again, ever. I mean, Bette Davis, she had a strong personality, and this character of Margot Channing, she has a strong personality, and who knows if that story is a way of just kind of beefing up publicity for the movie or not, but I have no trouble believing it.
In my house, you're a guest, not a director. Then stop being a star, and stop treating your guests as your supporting cast.
Now, let's not get into a big hassle.
It's about time we did. It's about time Margot realized that what's attractive on stage need not necessarily be attractive off. All right.
If anything, those kinds of interactions might have even served as like proper motivation or fuel for making the movie even better. But many years later, when Bette Davis was describing her experiences making the movie in an interview, she said, filming All About Eve was a very happy experience. The only bitch in the cast was Celeste Holm. Anyway, I can't help but crack up at this stuff because it perfectly reflects a lot of the savagery on display in this movie, where like every line of dialogue just seems to have like kind of barbs and thorns on it, in spite of the fact that you're cracking up every step of the way. And a lot of people have talked over the years about how Bette Davis was tough to work with. However, she was so in awe of the script and having so much fun making this movie. And she was falling in love with her co-star who plays the character of Bill, Gary Merrill. They ended up getting married and staying married for a couple of years. Apparently, Bette Davis was never more professional than when she was working on this movie. And they had an early screening of some of the dailies or rushes for the cast and crew. When they saw just how phenomenal the footage was, they were so excited by the footage they saw. Everybody was really eager to get back to work. And Bette Davis said some really kind things about Joseph L. Mankiewicz after this movie, where she said he basically resurrected her from the dead, because in the early 30s she was a major star, and she remained a star throughout the 1930s, but in the 40s her career started to slide. And as we all know, Hollywood and show business can be very unkind to aging actresses, even if they're as talented as Bette Davis. But she goes back to the pre-code of Hollywood. The earliest thing I've seen her in is, I think, 20,000 Years at Sing Sing. But in preparation for this video, I saw one of her earliest movies that helped make her a star, the movie Of Human Bondage.
You're too fine. You won't have none of me, but you'll sit here all night looking at your naked females.
Mildred.
You cad! You dirty swine!
The late 40s in Hollywood was a very different time from the early 30s, but thanks to All About Eve, not only did she enjoy like a career resurrection, she never stopped working until the bitter end. She basically was a star or active from the early 30s up through 1989. Her last movie, was a movie called Wicked Stepmother. There's a very short list of actresses out there who can remain relevant and popular across more than half a century.
Clyde Fitch, though you may not think so, was well before my time.
I've always denied the legend you were in Our American Cousin the night Lincoln was shot.
I don't think that's funny.
But the sad reality is there's just not that many projects out there, or not that many great screenplays out there where an aging actress can find the perfect part where the character in the story is facing a lot of the exact same challenges as the star herself. And some of the most moving scenes in this movie, and oftentimes some of the most kind of hilarious and or violent scenes in this movie, are where Margot is having to face the aging process.
Lloyd, I'm not 20-ish. I'm not 30-ish. 3 months ago, I was 40 years old. 40. 4-0.
And she faces the aging process from every conceivable angle, like jealousy for younger women, or feeling threatened that somebody might steal her man.
Margot, Bill is all of 8 years younger than you. Those years stretch as the years go on. I've seen it happen too often. Not to you, not to Bill. Isn't that what they always say?
Or that she might lose certain roles, or does she still want to play those roles? And it's just an absolute Hall of Fame performance. The movie's all about Eve, but the movie's really about Margot Channing. Well, the movie's about many things, but Bette Davis is just so goddamn good. She steals each and every single scene in which she appears, and she was just never better. Whether she's, lost in self-pity and drunkenness, like swigging martinis at her own party where everybody feels like it feels more like a funeral, or just lashing out and screaming at her closest friends.
The general atmosphere is very Macbethish. What has or is about to happen?
What is he talking about?
Macbeth.
We know you. We've seen you like this before. Is it over, or is it just beginning?
And with most movies, you're lucky if you can find one great line of dialogue in the entire movie, and this movie's just littered with them, where they just kind of are throwing them away. They have more great lines than they know what to do with, whether Margot's just sitting there listening to the radio, hearing a certain song and says, "I detest cheap sentiment."
I detest cheap sentiment.
Or warning everybody that it's about to be a bumpy night. And speaking of which, most people misinterpret the line about a bumpy night because they're so used to seatbelt laws in the modern era. But in 1950, nobody really wore seatbelts in cars or even knew what the hell you were talking about. The line's referring to an overnight flight.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
And every step of the way from start to finish, it is just sheer movie-watching delight. Seeing Bette Davis kind of sharpen her teeth and sharpen her claws in other people, whether it's her rivals and adversaries like Addison DeWitt, or even her husband-to-be, or her closest friends, or her closest collaborators. And there's this incredible scene early on where Margot and Bill have a fight because Margot is beginning to suspect that Eve is trying to pull her man away from her. And in spite of the fact that this is about to be a birthday party for Bill, you can tell that Margot is working herself up to just an epic shit fit of biblical proportions. But there's this great exchange between the two of them where I feel like it really gets at the heart or the root of what it means to be a professional actor and how you have to kind of stay on top of your game and stay sharp.
You have to keep your teeth sharp, all right. But I will not have you sharpen them on me or on Eve.
What about her teeth? What about her fangs?
She hasn't cut them yet, and you know it.
But little does Bill know, not only has Eve already cut her teeth, she cut her teeth a long time ago. And I think that's part of the brilliance of this movie. Like when the first time you see it versus the second and third and fourth time you see it, where you start to see Eve in a completely different light. The first time I saw it, I never really started to suspect Eve for being kind of duplicitous or double dealing or backstabbing or whatever the case might be. I never really suspected her true nature until very deep into the movie. And I've seen a lot of people criticize Anne Baxter's performance, saying they believe her as the backstabber, but they don't believe that Anne Baxter, as the character of Eve, would ever be capable of a performance on the level of Margot, the actress that she is trying to kind of study and then ultimately replace. But here's my theory on the movie. The character of Eve is absolutely capable of delivering a performance on the level of Margot because we've seen her do so the entire movie. There's probably like 10 or 15 whole seconds throughout the entire movie where we see the real Eve, the true Eve, like when she gets slapped by Addison, or moments where she's trying to seduce Bill and fails, or the scene where Margot sees her very briefly in front of a mirror, kind of posing and holding the dress up in front of her. We get these brief flashes where we see the real sociopath, like the social climber, the career opportunist.
Eve.
But the rest of the time, she is constructing this narrative. She's constructing this persona. She's performing for everybody all the time. And so I have no trouble believing that a psychopath like that will be capable of delivering one of the greatest performances you've ever seen on the stage.
I take it she read well.
It wasn't a reading, it was a performance. Brilliant, vivid, something made of music and fire.
And she was so convincing with that kind of whispery, kind of husky voice that she invented for that persona that Marilyn Monroe's in this movie. She never used her real voice again, ever in a movie. Marilyn Monroe, after this movie, started talking like the character of Eve in all of her movies with that kind of half whisper.
You remember Miss Caswell, don't you?
I do not. How do you do?
We've never met. Maybe that's why.
Miss Caswell is an actress, a graduate of the Copacabana School of Dramatic Art.
Since I mentioned Marilyn Monroe, I might as well stay on the topic because she came up in yet another one of my 75th anniversary reviews earlier this year with the movie Asphalt Jungle. But in 1950, Marilyn Monroe was about to explode. But I think these are some of the best scenes of her career where we get to see some of her comic timing. Obviously, her physical beauty is just, it knows no bounds. But I love how she shows up for my favorite scene of the movie, this incredible party sequence where Margot is just eating everybody alive. But she shows up with Addison DeWitt.
I distinctly remember Addison crossing you off my guest list. What are you doing here?
Dear Margot, you were an unforgettable Peter Pan. You must play it again soon.
And in spite of the fact that Marilyn Monroe is sharing the scene with Bette Davis and George Sanders as they're exchanging insults, like compliments and insults going back and forth, where he's basically talking trash about her once playing Peter Pan, and she's talking trash about how she specifically remembers crossing him off of her invite list. But you would think in a scene where George Sanders and Bette Davis are just, stabbing each other, that it'd be very difficult to make yourself noticed. But Marilyn Monroe, every once in a while, she'll just throw out these lines or these observations, which are just fucking hysterical. So I think a lot of times people overlook or underestimate Marilyn Monroe's acting chops and her comedic timing.
I'm afraid Mr. DeWitt would find me boring before too long.
You won't bore him, honey. You won't even get a chance to talk.
And what's great about this party scene is that we basically have the entire cast of the movie colliding and interacting in all sorts of surprising ways. But I love how this movie is totally frank about the fact that George Sanders is there with Marilyn Monroe in order to help her make an impression on the producer, Max Fabian. And Max Fabian's one of those classic producers where he's always on the verge of dying from a heart attack and he's got heartburn. And he's just like, a knotted up ball of stress and always sweating.
Margot, you by any chance haven't got any bicarbonate of soda in the house?
Poor Max. Heartburn.
But basically they're there so that she can try and seduce Max, or at least make an impression on Max, and get some possible roles in either theater productions and or film or television or whatever the case might be. But this movie's not making any attempts to disguise what's actually going on.
Claudia, come here. You see that man? That's Max Fabian, the producer. Now go and do yourself some good.
And at one point when Max provides a drink to Marilyn Monroe, George Sanders has this line where he looks over at her.
Thank you, Mr. Fabian.
Well done. I can see your career rising in the east like the sun.
And every time I hear George Sanders deliver that line, I have to pause the movie because I fall out of my chair just screaming with laughter. And comedy is such a weird thing. You never know how certain lines are going to hit you, but there's something about Addison DeWitt where basically like 50% of his dialogue in this movie, it's a showstopper. I have to pause, crack up, and then I can continue with the movie. And he just keeps making all these incredible observations throughout the party because he's clearly still in the role of theater critic, even when he's just interacting with people in a social setting. Like when Margot is getting increasingly kind of, like drowning in self-pity and drunkenness, at one point Addison looks up at her and just says,
I'm being rude now, aren't I? Or should I say, ain't I?
You're maudlin and full of self-pity. You're magnificent.
Like, I love how he never stops being the person who enjoys a good show, whether it's on the stage or real life. Or when Margot and Bill go upstairs for him to tuck her in or possibly help her sober up, take a bath, whatever, Addison has yet another observation where he says,
Too bad. We're going to miss the third act. They're going to play it off stage.
But I think the best observation that he makes at this party is when you have all these incredible characters sitting there on the stairwell, smoking, drinking, kind of just waxing poetic about this strange vocation of theirs.
We're a breed apart from the rest of humanity, we theater folk. We are the original displaced personalities.
You won't have to read his column tomorrow, Eve. You just heard it.
And I feel like that's one of the best ways to describe people who run off and join the circus, or run off and try to work in the movie industry, or go into publishing. But basically anybody who decides to devote their entire life and all their energy and basically set aside every other consideration apart from success and their chosen vocation. Addison just absolutely hits the nail on the head, and Joseph L. Mankiewicz was fond of putting characters in his movies that basically could be a stand-in for him making observations, and he's admitted in many interviews, Addison DeWitt is basically what Joseph L. Mankiewicz might have been had he chosen to be a theater critic as opposed to somebody who loved writing and directing movies. Addison DeWitt is, I feel like, the most cynical and honest side of Joseph L. Mankiewicz, as he just continues to steal the show in every single scene, which is tough to do when you're surrounded by so many incredible actors.
I'm in love with Lloyd.
Lloyd Richards is commercially the most successful playwright in America.
You have no right to say such thing.
And artistically the most promising. Eve, dear, this is Addison.
And as long as I'm ranting and raving about Addison DeWitt, I might as well continue to do so, because as the movie progresses, he increasingly starts to occupy center stage. But he has this great line, the first time he sees Eve reading with another actress during an audition. And the way he describes her performance to Margot in order to try to, rile her up and make her jealous. But it reminds me a little bit about anybody who has chosen to devote a huge chunk of their life to reviewing books or reviewing movies or reviewing theater.
Margot, as you know, I've lived in the theater as a Trappist monk lives in his faith. I have no other world, no other life. And once in a great while, I experience that moment of revelation for which all true believers wait and pray.
And that bit of praise by Addison to Margot's understudy makes her go berserk in the most delightful way possible, because she's trying to pretend like she's not mad. She's trying to pretend like she's not concerned. She's trying to pretend like everything is normal, but she increasingly starts to show her hand as she starts dressing down the playwright Lloyd Richards, as well as her fella Bill Sampson, which leads to one of the best fights between actress and writer, and in this case a playwright, but it might as well be a screenwriter. And he starts telling her that she should stick to plays by Beaumont and Fletcher because they've been dead for 300 years, to which she replies, all playwrights should be dead for 300 years. I mean, this is just delicious stuff.
All playwrights should be dead for 300 years.
That would solve none of their problems because actresses never die.
But I love how Lloyd Richards, when he's had enough of Margot talking trash about his career.
Just when exactly does an actress decide they're her words she's saying and her thoughts she's expressing?
Usually at the point when she has to rewrite and rethink them to keep the audience from leaving the theater.
And the battle continues to escalate from there, with Lloyd making comparisons to a piano that mistakenly presumes that it has written the concerto. But once Lloyd storms out of the theater in protest, the only person left is Bill, who's still up there on the stage, lying on the bed, holding up his hands like, take it easy on me. I don't want to fight. But Margot's still got a little bit of fight left in her, and it leads to a bittersweet scene of incredible tenderness, where you really get an incredible insight into the insecurities faced by an actress in her position. While she's at the peak of her fame and stardom, but she can feel it starting to slip away.
You have every reason for happiness.
Except happiness.
Every reason. But due to some strange, uncontrollable, unconscious drive, you permit the slightest action of a kid like Eve to turn you into an hysterical, screaming harpy.
This is just yet another example of how the role of Margot eerily reflects what's going on in Bette Davis's own life, because she was about to embark upon her fourth marriage with her co-star playing the part of Bill. And one of the reasons she has this incredible husky voice throughout the entire movie is that she was having these constant screaming matches with her third husband, with whom she was going through a divorce. But a lot of people have accused Bette Davis of copying Tallulah Bankhead for her delivery style. But nope, just spend all night screaming at your husband or about to be ex-husband, and you'll get there with your voice. I mean, she was a handful. I mean, Edmund Goulding had called Joseph L. Mankiewicz before the production and said, she's so tough to work with, she'll grind you down into a fine powder. And I just love that metaphor. But in any case, Bette Davis and Joseph L. Mankiewicz got along great. But getting back to Bette Davis's relationship with Gary Merrill, who plays the character of Bill, while they did get married and adopt a child after this movie, right after the production of All About Eve, at that time, Bette Davis asked Joseph L. Mankiewicz to write a sequel to All About Eve and implored him to do so. But many years later, after she and Merrill had gotten a divorce, apparently Bette Davis ran into Joseph L. Mankiewicz at a party and told him, Joe, you can forget that sequel. I've played it. and it doesn't work. So this is just life imitating art, or art imitating life, and how they constantly kind of bleed back and forth between each other.
It's obvious you're not a woman.
I've been aware of that for some time.
Well, I am.
I'll say.
That's what makes this movie so endlessly rewatchable, apart from just the fact that you can just sit back with no knowledge about the behind the scenes and just absolutely fall in love with it. But once you start digging into the weeds, you'll see that so much of like the actual lives of the cast and crew involved in the film are being reflected on the screen, and vice versa. And it's just a delicious cocktail that is just irresistible.
Where are you going? To find Eve.
That suddenly makes the whole thing believable.
But in a movie with a cast as incredible as this one, sometimes it's easy to overlook, forget about some of the smaller roles that are unforgettable in their own ways, because Thelma Ritter is in this movie, and I feel like if you go into like the Guinness Book of World Records and look for like who is the greatest supporting actress or character actor of all time, Thelma Ritter is definitely a contender, and she was great in Rear Window. She's incredible in Pick Up on South Street. She was really good in A Letter to Three Wives, an earlier Joseph L. Mankiewicz movie, and she's fantastic here.
May I be so bold as to say something? Have you ever heard of the word union?
Behind in your dues, how much?
I haven't got a union. I'm slave labor.
But she has a delivery style which I can only sum up with, I don't give a fuck what you think or what you're saying. I'm going to tell you precisely how I feel. And she's the first one to realize that Eve is a complete and total psychopath who is coming for their boyfriends, coming for their jobs, coming for everything.
You don't like Eve, do you?
You want an argument or an answer?
An answer.
No.
Why not?
Now you want an argument.
But in the world of showbiz, where people are constantly showering praise on actors and feeding them all sorts of lines and basically like trying to massage their egos and that sort of thing, it's very refreshing having an actress like Thelma Ritter in there who is more than happy to kind of cut people off at the knees every chance she gets.
And this is my dear friend and companion, Miss Bertie Coonan.
Oh, brother, Miss Coonan.
Oh, brother, what?
When she gets like this, all of a sudden she's playing Hamlet's mother.
And I should add that this was the first of 4 films in 4 successive years where Thelma Ritter was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. We had this movie, followed by The Mating Season in 1951, with A Song in My Heart in 1952, and then Pick Up on South Street in 1953, which is one of the best movies by Samuel Fuller. But yeah, Thelma Ritter, that's probably her best role. Although Rear Window, she's pretty goddamn good as well. Anyway, she's always great. Just throw a rock if you find a Thelma Ritter performance. It's probably a pretty goddamn good one. But I can feel that I'm starting to lose my voice, and I've not yet addressed the most important scene of the movie. Well, my favorite scene of the movie is the party scene, which is just a masterclass. The most important scene of the movie is when Addison DeWitt basically puts all of his cards on the table and speaks to Eve in an honest fashion on the night of her debut at an out-of-town performance up in New Haven. And I love how he describes those out-of-town performances are for New Yorkers who like to go to the theater out of town.
It is here that managers have what are called out-of-town openings, which are openings for New Yorkers who want to go out of town.
But Eve, who basically has been lying to Addison and lying to everybody the entire movie, and she always acts so wounded when Addison even implies, sometimes Eve, I think you keep things from me. She's like, oh, how could you suggest that when I rely upon you so much?
You know, Eve, sometimes I think you keep things from me.
I don't think that's funny.
It wasn't meant to be.
But Addison finally starts addressing some of the aspects of her bio, which were a tissue of lies. And Addison is never better than when he's drawing comparisons between Eve and the personality of like a serial killer or a professional fighter, someone who has no trouble going to sleep and coming out fighting. And then when she pretends to be wounded by the comparisons to killers or fighters, like, oh, well, killer, I meant champion.
The mark of a true killer. Sleep tight, rest easy, and come out fighting.
Why did you call me a killer?
What did I say, killer? I meant champion. I get my boxing terms mixed.
But then when she starts referring to herself as like a champion on his level...
It's important right now that we talk. Killer to killer.
Champion to champion.
Not with me, you're no champion. You're stepping way up in class.
And that's when we start to realize, as ruthless and cunning as Eve has been every step of the way in terms of getting what she wants, The true sociopath in this movie is Addison DeWitt. Like, she's just a beginner when it comes to being nakedly ambitious and backstabbing and so on and so forth. Addison DeWitt has been at this for a very, very long time. And as he says, she is stepping way up in class. And much like the character of Eve, who we rarely see be completely honest in terms of who she is, where she doesn't have some sort of persona that she's trying to sell to somebody, this is when Addison basically takes off his mask and starts saying things like,
Is it possible, even conceivable, that you've confused me with that gang of backward children you play tricks on? That you have the same contempt for me as you have for them?
And that alone would probably be the most revealing line of the movie, if not for the fact that he follows it up a few minutes later with this barn burner.
You're an improbable person, Eve, and so am I. We have that in common. Also a contempt for humanity, an inability to love and be loved, insatiable ambition and talent.
But long story short, after Addison has successfully disentangled or kind of dismantled all the lies and deceptions and narratives that she's been selling to people about her biography and her background every step of the way, she's basically just like a quivering mass of tears and just, she's completely, totally emotionally distraught. And he wishes her good luck on the stage that night. She's like, oh, I couldn't bear to go on, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, couldn't go on? You'll give the performance of your life. That's yet another line that offers so many incredible insights into what drives actors to greatness.
I couldn't go on.
Couldn't go on? You'll give the performance of your life.
It's about taking all the chaos of your life and all that fuel and all that energy and all that melodrama and basically using your body almost like a filter to kind of like allow all that energy to go up onto the stage where you're just like you're an empty vessel until all these experiences flow through you and take shape as a role. It's just, this is one of those movies that really gets to the heart of what is theater.
The theater, the theater. What book of rules says the theater exists only within some ugly buildings crowded into 1 square mile of New York City?
Whether it's on the stage or it's stand-up comedy or a movie or a great book or a great professional wrestling match, it's all theater. And I just love Joseph L. Mankiewicz's attitude towards theater.
It's just that there's so much bourgeois in this ivory green room they call the theater. Sometimes it gets up around my chin.
Seems to have been a source of inexhaustible obsession for Joseph L. Mankiewicz his entire career. And even in 1981, when he did the documentary all about Mankiewicz, he was still talking about how there's so many books out there that he's still dying to read, and he's still waxing poetic about all the things that he would like to do as a filmmaker or as a theater director. It's just incredible, and I find that level of enthusiasm and that level of obsession and that level of dedication and focus to be incredibly inspiring, whatever you choose to do with your life. We should all be so lucky to find something that's worthy of that level of obsession that Joseph L. Mankiewicz exhibited over so many decades. But maybe at this point I have vomited enough praise on the movie. Let's talk about the aftermath of the release of the movie, where it became an instant hit. On a budget of $1.4 million, it grossed $8.4 million. And in 1950s dollars, if you adjust to 2025, I don't know what that number would be, but anytime you have a movie which comes out and grosses more than 5 times its budget, well, then you're doing something right. But then the Academy Award nominations started coming out, and this movie just, it cleaned up. And according to what it says over here on Wikipedia, at that time, it received a record 14 nominations at the 23rd Academy Awards, becoming the only film in Oscar history to receive 4 female acting nominations. Davis and Baxter as Best Actress, Holm and Ritter as Best Supporting Actress, and it went on to win 6 awards, including Best Picture, as well as Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay, Mankiewicz's second consecutive wins in both categories. But over time, great box office success or great success with the Academy Awards, that all tends to fade into the background. What matters are people still continuing to discover the movie many years later, many generations later. It's still encouraging people to become great filmmakers. Like William Friedkin, the director of The French Connection and The Exorcist and Sorcerer. This was his favorite movie. He loved Citizen Kane. He saw Citizen Kane many times, but his favorite movie was all about Eve. But the fact that a company like the Criterion Collection, after 75 years, would deem it worthy of such loving restoration and preservation after all these years, that tells you all you need to know. And my hope is that due to the popularity of Criterion these days and all those celebrity visits to the Criterion Closet and all that stuff, the brand is more popular than ever, that there's some 15 or 16-year-old kid out there who's going to either discover the Blu-ray through those Criterion Closet videos or just through their love and affection for the Criterion library, and they'll see this movie for the first time, and it'll not only ignite an interest in Joseph L. Mankiewicz's career, but that it might ignite an interest in his brother Herman J. Mankiewicz's career, which leads to a possible obsession with Citizen Kane and Orson Welles. Like, that for me is how it all went down. back in the late 90s when I first got obsessed with film history. I would see one good movie like The Blue Angel by Joseph von Sternberg. Oh, well, who's Marlene Dietrich? What else does she do? Oh, she did this movie called Touch of Evil. What's that? Oh, who's this Orson Welles guy? But it's like this domino effect or this chain reaction where your love and affection for one filmmaker or one actor, it kind of branches out in a million different directions to all these other films, which lead to additional discoveries. And then you start watching documentaries or reading interviews with those filmmakers, and they start telling you about, you know, which filmmakers were inspiring them or which books, etc. And it just leads to this like never-ending chain reaction of discovery, where even at age 49, when I've been watching old movies for a very, very long time, I'm still making fresh discoveries, even in the career of directors like Joseph L. Mankiewicz. Like I said before, The Ghost of Mrs. Muir and A Letter to Three Wives, I absolutely fucking fell in love with them. They were fantastic. They're just not quite on the level of All About Eve, which is one of the best movies of that era. So once again, the unholy trinity of movies about showbiz: In a Lonely Place, Sunset Boulevard, and All About Eve. If you're going to start your study of the year 1950 with 3 movies, you could definitely do worse than those 3. I think those are 3 of the best movies of that year, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege singing their praises on this channel. And I have a feeling that I'm just beginning my 75th anniversary celebrations of great movies of the past, and I've been working on it on and off for like the last month or 2. I'm also working on a 100th anniversary celebration of my top 10 favorite movies from 1925, which obviously I need to finish before the end of this year, but expect more videos of a similar nature on this channel in the months and years to come. But I think at this point, I've said that all that I need to say. There's plenty more that could be said, but I'm getting hoarse, I'm getting tired, and I'm ready to start editing this sucker. So thank you so much for sticking with me every step of the way. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.